The CMHC expects housing starts to decline this year and prices to go up thanks to increased demand and constrained supply. By 2025, the CMHC says prices could even reach the peak level seen in early 2022. So what else are the feds prepared to do to address that? Steve MacKinnon is the government's House Leader. Hi, Minister. Good to have you back.
Good to be with you, Vashi.
I appreciate you making the time. I want to start off on some of the announcements that your government has made over the past week in particular, which are primarily geared to increasing the supply of the construction of homes, rather, and then also the supply of rental units. The CMHC has just come out with its forecast for housing starts in the sector, and it forecasts next year that they'll be down over 2023 and even below 2022, I believe, as well. But they're also forecasting that prices are going to go up. What's your message to Canadians who need help right now?
Well, the same report says there's some very good long-term prospects for housing in Canada as well. But what I would say about that is we agree housing is an urgent national priority. And that's why you've seen over the last couple of weeks, ministers and the Prime Minister go out around the country, work with cities, provinces, community groups, and others in terms of addressing this priority on a segment-by-segment basis, whether it's nonprofits, increasing the ability to build homes by improving infrastructure, by just increasing supply generally. That's what's going to get prices down. That's what's going to bring stability to the housing market. That's what's going to give our young people the possibility of home ownership.
As you mentioned, though, that's in the long term. And I found it so interesting that you use the exact phrase, it's an urgent national priority, because last August, the Prime Minister intimated something very different, that in fact, he specifically said housing was not primarily a federal responsibility. That was primarily a provincial responsibility. Did you only recognize something different because your popularity slipped so acutely after that?
Well, what the Prime Minister said is that the federal government will be there with the tools, the programs, the resources to do its part. I would argue that we're actually now doing more than our fair share in terms of bearing the weight of this problem. I think the long-term prospects for housing in Canada are very good.
Did you think prior to last fall, let's say, that it was an urgent national priority? And I'll add some context to my question. So, for example, one of the announcements your government made this week was a $15 billion top-up to a program that doles out loans in order to build apartments.
Yes.
That is a program that was initially introduced in 2017 under a different name, $25 billion in loans. $18 billion of that has already been loaned out. So far, 11,000 units have been constructed in 7 years. What about that record would give Canadians the impression you ever felt this was an urgent national priority?
You know, builders in my riding tell me that those very programs are the ones that are making a difference between making a decision to put shovels in the ground now or shovels in the ground perhaps on a longer term basis and get those rental units built. And I think the CMHC report that you referred to talked about in most markets in Canada, rental housing and those rental units are going up more quickly, and that specific segment is growing. Those are real units that are going to house Canadians, and that's part of the mix that we will require to get supply up and prices down.
But that didn't address the substance of my question, which was that the record your government has on that program is a negligible one. I mean, 11,000 units in 7 years for $18 billion.
But these are loans, and that is one part of the mix. So those loans are repaid, and those with interest to Canadians and to the taxpayers. So anything that is able to be done to move the yardsticks for rental housing. There are other programs and other initiatives designed to increase the volume and supply of other kinds of housing. But I think any tool and lever that we can use right now to bring stability to this very thorny issue is, I think, a welcome one.
And certainly, I'm not taking away from the point that lots of stuff helps, but ultimately Canadians will need that stuff to be effective. And that's why I'm asking about your prior record, and if you estimate that this will be any different, and how long will it take? I know you're talking about the long term. The problem is felt acutely now by Canadians, particularly the younger ones that your government is speaking to. How long will it take for them to be able to afford a home?
Well, let's talk about the evolution of this issue. 2015, standing stop. The federal government was essentially out of the housing business when we took over. A couple years in, we tabled the National Housing Strategy. Those programs are operating. They're investing in every province and every corner of this country in collaboration, it must be said, with provinces, with cities, with organizations. that real homes are getting built with this strategy. We've added to that now, of course, because we have this additional supply problem.
The CMHC says in order to restore affordability, by 2030, an additional 3.5 million homes have to be created. Right now, with the suite of things you've announced, you're getting towards, I think it's around 800,000, something like that. So my point is essentially, yes, you're going to have an impact on supply over the long term, probably not for another decade, and ultimately it will somewhat work towards restoring affordability, but it's not nearly the amount that the CMHC has laid out is necessary. Which leads me to
not all homes are a direct result of government programming either, of course.
Sure,
and that's why we
housing starts are down.
That's why we want to enable more housing by allowing municipalities to leverage funds to put those sewers in, the streets in, and make sure that development can occur in a rational, reasonable way in their communities, and so that people can have access to a greater supply, a greater number of options, so that our young people can have that aspiration to own a home.
Is there any consideration about the shorter term and what other levers are available to you around immigration? You've done some stuff on the temporary streams. Have you ruled out anything else?
Well, let's talk about immigration, because everywhere I go in my riding or across the country, I have business people, small business people, farmers, the hospitality sector, manufacturers, large and small. They need people. We have labor pressures in this country. We have labor shortages. So the government, quite properly, in conjunction with provinces, in conjunction with employers, put in a mix of tools that would allow them to supplement the number of temporary workers. We are now at a point where that has obviously become an issue in terms of the raw numbers of people who are in the country. So you've seen
Canada
Mr. Miller
can't absorb it, is what the Prime Minister admitted this week.
Well, you've seen Mr. Miller put in place now a reduction in the number
in the temporary stream.
of
I'm
those
just simply
temporary
asking,
residents.
have you ruled out any other measures, for example, along the permanent stream?
Well, the permanent stream, remember, are economic immigrants. They're judged on a point schedule.
But you have a number,
for the most part, these are people who come to the country with, in many cases, financial resources, education, their skills, and
they still need a home,
and their imaginations are needed in this country, and we need to continue to grow. We have a declining birth rate, like most Western countries, and Canada, I think, is seen as a model around the world for how we are able to attract skilled immigrants to this country who come and immediately participate in our workforce, immediately create other opportunities for Canadians, and immediately positively impact our country.
And I'm not taking away from the virtues of immigration, but I think it's a fair question when the Prime Minister admits this week that immigration has exceeded the capacity of Canada to absorb the levels that they're currently at, to ask whether or not, beyond the temporary streams and the decisions you've made there, if your government is prepared to do anything else. From your answer, I take it that the answer is no.
Well, in terms of our regular immigration program, we are going to continue with that because it's what demographers and others say is required in the long-term interest of paying the pensions and the health care and the things that Canadians value.
I have just one quick final question, because I imagine I'll be asking a lot of questions about the way in which all of this will be paid for. I know $15 billion plus a little bit more is loans. $10 billion is new spending on top of a $40 billion deficit. Do you plan on introducing either a wealth tax or an excess wealth or excess profit tax?
I'm going to let the finance minister announce the full budget on April 16th. I know she will be addressing all of the things that you and I regularly look
you're
forward.
announcing the whole budget in advance of the budget, so I think it's fair to ask how much it's all going to cost. Are you going to raise taxes in order to pay for what you're promising?
Oh, I think we've been very detailed about what these specific measures are going to cost, and yes, we've used these 2 weeks outside of Parliament to travel across the country, work with community groups, work with provinces, mayors, and others to make sure that they understand and they can contribute to our housing policies. But the budget remains the budget. It'll be announced on April 16th, and it will contain all of the fiscal measures and projections and other things that we've always looked for.
So you can't say yes or no to taxes at this point?
I'm going to let the finance minister talk about her own budget.
I'll make sure I ask about that then. Thank you very much, Minister. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Vashi.